We're starting another chapter now, and you'll notice we're back in AutoCAD 2019, and we've got a drawing open for you. It's called 00_office_ground_plan.dwg, and you'll recognize it as the drawing you used in the previous chapter when you brought CAD files into Revit. Now, what we're going to look at now is getting our layers and our drawings set up to industry standards. Now, I've cheated a little bit here because this particular drawing has been exported out of Revit to a known standard. So if I go to the Home tab on the ribbon and go to my layer properties in the layers panel here, you can see that all of my layer naming there is set up to BS1192, British Standard 1192, because when I exported this DWG file out of Revit, I made sure that it adhered to that particular standard. Now, the benefit I've got there is it's come out of Revit and all my layer names are all set up the way I want them to be. But obviously what you're going to do when you start setting up an AutoCAD drawing to a known standard is make sure that your layer naming philosophy is correct. Make sure that your layer colors, your line types, your line weights are all doing what they should be doing. So you make sure that everything is set up religiously to that particular standard. So if I just close the Layer Properties Manager for the moment, I've obviously got elements in this drawing that adhere to that standard already. But what we're going to do in this chapter is get all of this set up so that we can create an AutoCAD template that adheres to those industry standards. Once again, we're in the 00officegroundplan.dwg file, like we were in the previous video. What we need to think about now is setting and naming those layers to that known standard. Now, as I mentioned previously, this drawing has been exported out to BS1192 from Revit. So the layer naming is already done. If I go into my layer properties in my layers panel again, you can see that all my layer names adhere to BS1192. So I don't need to worry about the naming, but what I do need to worry about is things like color, line type, and line weight, and making sure that these are set appropriately. Now, what you'll notice there, for example, is we don't actually have a viewports layer. So what I'm going to do there is I'm just going to create a miscellaneous viewports layer first of all. So I'll click there like so, and I'm just going to call it viewports. I'm not going to worry too much about BS1192 at the moment. And just for ease of use, I'll call it viewports. Now, you want that to be a particular color. I'm going to make it blue, like so. And what I'm also going to do is make sure the line type is continuous, but also you don't want your viewports to plot. So you click there on the little plotter symbol to make sure those viewports don't plot if you plot any drawings. So we've got a new layer there now. I'll click on name there and name again, just to make sure that that's all in alphabetical order, like so. Now, if you don't want your viewports to kind of mess up your BS1192 layers like that, because as you can see, it's kind of in between two of them there, you could rename it. So if I click there and click and hold on that viewports layer name, you'll see that I can rename it. And what you might want to do there is perhaps put an @ symbol in front, like so, and then press enter like that. And then when you do the name thing next time, it goes to the top of the list like so. So all your miscellaneous layers that might not be BS1192 can have that @ symbol in front of them, for example. Just a thought, something that you might want to think about when you're naming and setting your layers in your AutoCAD drawings. Now, what we're doing here is we're preparing all of this so that when we do start linking and importing CAD drawings into Revit, all of this information starts to come through, and you can then look at the import instances in Revit and you've got everything named to a standard, rather than just having a layer called wall or window or door, for example. So what we've got to start looking at now is setting these appropriately. So I'm going to close the Layer Properties Manager. I'm going to look at one layer, one particular object in detail, and that's the grid lines. I'm going to zoom in on that bubble where it's got the K in it. Now, when I zoom in real close, can you see it is actually a grid line? You can see the spaces and the dashes and so on. I'll double click on the wheel again to zoom extents. Now, what that means is that basically these particular grid lines are using a line type scale that is a little bit too small. We want it to be bigger so that they stand out. So what we would do then normally is make sure that our global line type scale in this particular drawing is set accordingly. Now, the reason I say the global line type scale in this case is because we're going to set up a template from this in this chapter so that we've got a template to create new drawings that can then be linked into our Revit projects. Now, the reason that we've got those drawings there is to start developing the Revit model from the 2D CAD drawings. Now, that may be the case, it might not be the case, but this is an instance that you might need in your drafting modeling life when you're using AutoCAD and Revit. So I'm just going to type LT scale, like so. And I'm going to do a global LT scale change. I press enter, and at the moment, the line type scale factor is currently set to 1. You can see that there on the dynamic input on the crosshair there on the screen. I'm going to change that line type scale factor to 50 for everything that is dashed or dotted in this drawing. So I'm going to do 50 and enter. All of a sudden, everything becomes clearer. The grids and the dashes and spaces and everything look the way they should. So that LT scale can be saved in this particular AutoCAD drawing. So what we've done there is we've looked at the naming and we've looked at the settings. Now, more importantly, select a grid line. And you want to make sure that everything is using the by layer settings. It's adopting the properties of the layer it's on. So you'll notice that grid line, if I look at the properties panel, is using the grid line type, but it's using it individually as an individual property. We want that grid line type applying to the layer rather than individual objects. So hit escape a few times. What we'll do now, we'll go into layer properties. There's our grid layer there, and we're going to select continuous, and we're going to use grid line instead of OK. So that then makes sure that all of those grid lines, if they're set to by layer for their line type property, will use that grid line type. I'll close the layer properties manager. I'm now going to select all of my grid lines. Make sure you get all of them, like so, and there's a couple of short ones there, remember that as well. And what I'm going to do now is in the properties panel, make sure that they are using by layer. In escape to deselect, and you can see they're using that grid line type now, but by layer rather than as individual objects in your AutoCAD drawing. Now that's all the stuff that you need to set up in your AutoCAD drawing. It's important that you do that, and then all of this information can be retained when we start to generate templates to create our CAD drawings from. Then, with those standards applied, going to go into our Revit projects. You may remember in a previous video, a previous chapter of this course, we talked about utilizing our layer states, where we could basically set a state of a group of layers in an AutoCAD drawing, and we could retain that information. Now, in this particular drawing, our 00 office ground plan, that layer state should still be in the drawing because I've saved it all the way through up until this point. Now, the way that we can check that is go to the Home tab on the ribbon, expand the Layers panel by clicking on the flyouts, and click there on the pin. Now, if I click there like so, you'll see that we don't have a layer state as such. Now, that's because, obviously, I've done a save as. I haven't used the same drawing. Now, what we're going to do there is we're going to manage our layer states, first of all, and we're going to create a new layer state in this drawing, and we're going to call it existing, like so. And the description will be existing layers from Revit export. Now, I'm doing this in this particular case because I know that this is the colors, the line types, etc. that have come across from my Revit export. So I'm going to call that existing. I'm going to click on OK, and you can see that that's all in place, like so. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close that particular dialog box, and I'm going to click here now, and you can see there's my existing layer state. So I can click on that at any time, and all the settings of all these layers will go back to those particular settings, those particular standards, whenever I want them to. Now, I'm going to just unpin my layers panel there so it goes back into the ribbon. What I'm going to do now is go into layer properties, and I'm going to start changing the properties of the layers in the layer properties manager. So for example, I want my grids and grid references all to be red. So I'm going to select red, like so for there, and red for there as well, like so. So they've changed already. My columns, I'm going to make them a green color. So let's make them green. I'm going to change a number of colors in here just purely to change the states of the layers in the drawing itself. So my walls, for example, are a green color. I might change that to, let's say, a brown color. So I'm going to go there to my external walls. Going to give that an orangey brown kind of tint like that. I'll do the same with that one with the external walls and do that as well. Now you'll notice in the background, if I just move the Layer Properties Manager over a little bit, you'll see that everything is changing in the drawing as well. It all looks very, very different. So if I now close the Layer Properties Manager, you'll see that that looks very different. It's much more colorful, much more vibrant. The colors in the existing setting were quite muted. We wanted them to stand out a bit more in the model space like this. So now I go back to my layers flyout, click on the arrow and pin it open. I click on the flyout here and go manage layer states. Now at the moment, my existing layer state, as you can see here, is not the same as the DWG. So what I'm going to do is click on new, and I'm going to call this BS1192. And I'm going to put a dash and put project because it's my BS1192 project layer state. So the description here will be layers updated for project to BS1192, for example. I'll click on OK there, and now can you see same as DWG? Yes. So I'll close that now, and you can see now that when I pick my existing state, it takes me back to that. When I click on there and go to BS1192, it changes again like so. Now those layer states can be saved in my drawing if I want them to. So as long as I save this drawing now, those layer states will be saved, and what I can do is save them into a template. So I'll just unpin that like so, and that goes back like that. Now, I'm going to keep all of the information in the drawing, purely because you don't want to be looking at a blank screen. But if you were going to create a template, ideally you'd possibly want to delete all these elements in the drawing, perhaps do a purge as well, just to tidy everything up. But all you would do now is save this to a template. So I'm just going to save this to the default AutoCAD template folder. So I'm going to do a save as, and I'm going to come into files of type here and just change that to drawing template. And it takes me, as you can see, to the template folder for AutoCAD. And I'm just going to change this to a new particular template. Now you notice I've got a training one there in the list. So what I'm going to do is call this a training one. But I'm going to put a dash there and I'm going to put BS1192 layers. So I might put an underscore and then layers like that. So I know it's my layers template. So when I click on save now, they'll ask for a description. So I'll just put something like BS1192 layers template. Now, obviously, you'd be a lot more sophisticated with your naming philosophy for templates. I'm just giving you a very rough guide for the naming, obviously, but I'm showing you the workflow and the process. So I'll click on OK there, and that's my template saved. You can see the name of it at the top of the screen. So what I'll do is I'll save that now, and I'm going to close that particular file. Now, I want to create a new drawing from that template. So what I can do now is I'll click here, like so, and if I go down, there's my layers template. When I click there, it brings in a whole new drawing. You see, that's drawing one, but more importantly, let's check whether those layer states are still there. Yes, they are, because they've been saved with that template. They can be used in any new drawing that I create from that template as well. So those layer states are really important because what they allow you to do is they allow you to manage how your layers are displayed in any drawing. Now, I say display there, but displaying them to the appropriate standard is really, really important when you then start linking and importing those CAD files into your Revit projects. So you can see how important it is creating a template like that and making sure that it's usable, obviously, for new drawings that you might be using to bring into your Revit projects. In the previous video, we set up a drawing template file, a DWT file with the appropriate layer states that we wanted, all the layer naming philosophy, the line types, the line weights, and so on, all adhering to a known standard, in this case, BS1192, the British Standard 1192 for CAD drawings. Now that template, what I've done is I've revised it a little bit and saved it for you so that we can use it for this particular video in the chapter. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up a new drawing from that particular template file. You can download it from the library and just store it in a known location so that you can then create a new drawing from it. And that's what we're going to do now. So I've got AutoCAD open in the Start tab, And all I'm going to do is go up to New here on the Quick Access toolbar, like so. And as per usual, it goes to the default template folder, looking for all of the default template files, the DWT files. Now you need to browse to the location where your DWT file is that you download from the library. I saved the location here on my location bar, and there it is there. So that's the DWT file that you want to use, that one there, training-bs1192 underscore layers.dwt. So download that from the library, store it in that location, open a new drawing from that template file. Once you've found it, when you click on it, you click on open, and that starts a whole new drawing. And you can see that I've obviously tweaked that drawing. There's none of the building information in there, just some grid lines and some grid bubbles set up to that particular layer state. So I'm going to go to the Home tab on the ribbon now, and what I'm going to do is go into my layer flyout here, and go to layer states, and you see they've been saved. So if I go back to existing, there's my existing Revit layer state. And then if I go back again and go back to here to BS1192 project, it goes to the project settings. Now the benefit I've got here is I can now start drawing objects using those layers that I've saved in the template. So if I go to my layer properties now, you'll see that my layer state is set to those BS1192 project settings. I can change that layer state if I want to. I'm going to leave it as it is at the moment. Now I can draw a wall, I can draw a door, and so on. Let's set something to a layer that we're going to use. So I'm going to go for door, like so. Now there's a reason why, and there's a whole load of blocks that I've stored in that template for you to use. So we're going to make that the current layer, like so. So just double click next to it, or you can click up here on the green tick, or anywhere you like. You can go up here and change it if you want to on the layer drop down. I'm going to close the layer properties manager now, and we're using the door layer. If I go to the insert tab now on the ribbon and go to insert here, you'll see that there's lots of blocks available. Now, if you scroll all the way up, you've got lots of columns and so on. Now, all of these have come across from the Revit export. So that's why I've kept them in the template for you. So I'm going to bring some double doors in, and there's my double doors there. There's my block. I'm not going to worry about walls, doors, windows, etc., where they're going to go. But you can see now that when I bring those doors in and just click there, if I zoom in, and just hover over it like that, it's a block reference, and it's on the appropriate standard layer. That's the important thing, because these objects now are going to be in a drawing that you may use to bring across into Revit as a linked CAD file or as an imported CAD file, which means they're on the right layers and they're adhering to the AutoCAD standards that you set originally. That's the really important bit. So you're making sure that these drawings adhere to the right standards before you even consider linking them or importing them into your Revit projects. So if I just zoom out slightly now, I'll change my layout, I'll go back to the Home tab, and what I might do now is use my external wall layer. There, it's that one there. So it's got the EXT at the end. And I might just draw a wall now, perhaps using a rectangle. So if I click there, and I'll use the intersection there maybe, and I'll drag upwards like that. And I want that to be 10 meters long, so that's going to be 10,000, like so, and then a comma, and then it might be 350 wide, the wall. So there's my wall there. And what I can start thinking about now is where this particular door goes. So if I select that block, what I might need to do is now rotate that. So I could perhaps use the grip there, click on the grip, right click, rotate. I'm going to put that in as 180 degrees so it goes the other way. And then you can start thinking about where that door goes in the wall. So if I zoom in real close now, I can obviously move it. I've got corners to snap to. There's the mullions there, the door frame itself. So what I could do there is perhaps utilize one of those corners there to bring it into my wall. So I might right click, use the move command, zoom in and use that corner there as the move point. So as I zoom out now and come up here, I can bring this into my wall. I might do a shift and a right click and use nearest, and I'll pop that on there somewhere like that. Now, obviously, it's not perfect. I've obviously got to start editing that wall now and start showing where the opening is. The wall is a bit big there as well, so I might need to possibly move that down. So if I click there, right click, move, actually use that end point, just bring it vertically down there like so, or up, or down. It all depends on where you're going to place things in the AutoCAD drawing. So it may be that you want this edge instead against that edge there. So you select door, right click, move, and you're utilizing obviously your AutoCAD here to tidy everything up. Now, I'm not going to draw an entire drawing for you, but you get the idea here now that you're developing a CAD drawing that can be utilized in Revit. But that CAD drawing must adhere to the same standards that you're using in your Revit project. Now, I've been a little bit spoiled here because what I've done is my original drawing, I exported it out of the Revit model and created a DWG from it. But you get the idea. When you're creating your drawings and your templates, they must adhere to known industry standards. And then when you bring them into Revit, those standards are reflected when you're doing your queries on your import instances in your Revit projects. Something we need to think about when we're creating our AutoCAD drawings that we're going to link and import into Revit using our AutoCAD standards is file size. We don't want to have lots of extraneous information in the DWG files that are going to be linked or imported. The reason being is we only need to give the information that is needed. When you think about it, you're not going to be actually working on the DWG in the Revit project. You're using it as a point of reference, a bit like an XREF in AutoCAD itself. So you want to make sure that you purge out everything that you don't need in your DWG file. Now, for that reason, I've got a nice new DWG file for you that you can download from the library. It's called 00_office_ground.dwg, a slightly different name to the other drawings we have been using in this particular chapter and previous chapters. So just make sure you download the appropriate file because this one's got all the nice settings in it and it's all ready to go in true Blue Peter fashion. Just so you know, Blue Peter was a child's TV program and they always had one they prepared earlier. So there you go. That's kind of how it works. Here's the one that I prepared earlier for you. That's the file name at the top of the screen. Make sure you download the right one from the library to use. Now, when we start purging, we're going to obviously lose things from the drawing itself. So, for example, I might not want the grid lines to go across in my imported or linked CAD file in Revit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the elements that use the grids. So if I select these here like so, and like so, make sure you get all of the grid lines and the bubbles. Just do a right click and erase them like so. So now they've gone from the drawing. Now I haven't saved that, and even if I did save it, I can still undo it if I need to. But more importantly, if I now start purging, so I just type purge like that on the dynamic input, press enter, there's the purge dialog box. So if I jump into layers now, you'll notice that I can not only get rid of the viewports layer, which isn't being used, but I can now lose the grid layer. Now, this is where things start getting important, because do I need that layer if it's not going to come across into my Revit project? Do I need that standard layer that adheres to BS1192? Do I need to keep it in this particular drawing? Well, if you don't need the grids, no, you don't need it. So you can purge it out of the drawing. But remember, as soon as you purge, save, and move that drawing to another location somewhere, you've lost that layer for good. Now, you may need the drawing to be worked on, especially if it's a linked CAD file in Revit. So don't purge out things that you may need later. For example, if I go and look at blocks here, you can see that I've got a grid standard. That's my grid lines, and my grid bubbles that I had when I had the grids on the drawing. So I could lose that particular block as well if I wanted to. There's also dimension styles that I could lose that I'm not using. And if I scroll down, you'll also see that there's text styles that I could potentially lose if I'm not using those as well. I'm going to click on close, and I'm not going to purge anything out. In fact, I'm going to undo and go back to getting my grid lines back again. The reason being is I know that those grid lines will be really important when I link this CAD file to my Revit project, because I can utilize the grid lines from the CAD file to generate my structural grids in Revit for my columns, my walls, and so on. So when you're working in your AutoCAD drawings to a known standard, in our case BS1192, make sure that you only give the information you need, but more importantly, you retain the information you need to still work on the DWG file. And that's really important if you're linking the CAD file, because the CAD file will still be worked on, and the next time you open up your Revit project, you'll see the changes to the CAD file if it's linked into your Revit project. We're starting a new chapter now, and we're going to start looking at the additional settings available to you in Revit. Now, these additional settings are things such as hatch patterns, line types, line weights, and so on, that can be adopted to work with the same standard settings that you would have had in your AutoCAD standards when you were bringing in your linked or imported CAD drawings. Now, we've got a Revit project for you, open in Revit. It's Office Reception Area.rvt. See the name of it up there in the title block. And then what we're going to do, we're going to go into the 00 ground floor plan. That's over here in the browser. Just double click on 00 grounds there in the floor plans, and there's our floor plan there. Now, this is an actual Revit floor plan, and as you can see, it's an actual Revit model. If I click back there in the isometric view, so you can see there that this is an actual Revit model, and that's the ground floor plan of it. So there's no linked CAD drawings in this particular case. Now, we're going to go to the Manage tab in the ribbon, and the additional settings are here, like so. And you can see there's a lot of information there. And if I start coming down this list, you can see that there are fill patterns, material assets, line styles, line weights, and line patterns. Now, line styles are a group of line patterns. If I click there, like that, you can go in and actually edit your line styles, like so. If I come into the additional settings and go into line patterns, that's where all the patterns are set up. So you pick the pattern and it goes into your line style. So you can see it's a bit like line types in AutoCAD. I'll just cancel that for the moment. But all of these additional settings on this drop-down menu here are what would be used in the same way that you would set up all of your settings in AutoCAD. And one of the benefits you have is you can go in and edit things like your line styles, your line weights, and your line patterns, and you can edit them so that they are the same standard as, obviously, the standards you might be using in your linked and imported CAD drawings in Revit. So as we work through this chapter in the Office Reception Area.rvt file, we'll go through and have a look at how all of these additional settings work in Revit and allow you to start adapting similar standards to the drawings from AutoCAD that you might have used to start creating your Revit projects. We're staying in our Office Reception Area.rvt file, and what we're going to do is we're going to go into these additional settings now in a bit more detail. And I'm going to show you how you can change things, edit things, and adapt these additional settings to the same settings as your standards that you might have already set in AutoCAD in your drawings. So let's have a look now at fill patterns. So I'm going to go to the Manage tab on the ribbon. There's the settings panel. Click on the flyout for additional settings and jump into fill patterns like so. Now you've got different types of fill patterns available to you in Revit. You have the drafting type pattern and the model type pattern. Now, model type pattern is more for modeling. So if I come down the list here, you'll see I've got things like masonry, parquet flooring, I've got Spanish tiles. If I keep coming down, I've got things like wood grain. These are the sort of things you would use when you're modeling in, obviously, Revit, and perhaps creating views that need those particular type of fill patterns. Your drafting pattern types are more things like blockwork crosshatch, blockwork high density, low medium, you've got blockwork dense there. If I start scrolling down, you've got things like diagonal crosshatch. And if we go down a bit more, some earth, some plaster, and you can see there that we've got things like sand and stone and wood finish. And basically these are different. They're what I call drafting type patterns, whereas the modeling patterns are a lot more realistic. So you can obviously use any of those. You can, if you want to edit fill patterns, you can create a new fill pattern. So if I click on new, I can set it up the way I want it to, give it a name, add it to the list. Orientation in host layers, I can orientate it to the view, keep it readable, or align it with the elements in the Revit project. So I can create my own if I want to. I could also remove and copy if I want to by duplicating patterns as well. So there's all that information in there that will allow you to generate your own patterns to align with your AutoCAD drawing standards. I'll just click on cancel there for the moment. So what about an example of a fill pattern? Well, let's zoom in on this room here in the 00 ground floor plan. If I zoom in a bit and just pat across a little, get it central on the screen as well. There we go. So we've got this room here and we want to put a fill pattern in to highlight it. So what I might do there is go to the annotate tab, and in the detail panel here, I'll select a filled region. Now it goes into sketch mode because obviously it wants me to sketch the boundary of the filled region. I'm just going to use the rectangle command here like so, snap to that endpoint there, take it up to the other corner there and click like so. So that's my boundary complete. So if I now click on that green tick, there's my filled area with the pattern. Now that's a filled region and it's using a diagonal crosshatch. And you can see that when it's selected over here in the properties. If I click on the down arrow, you'll see there that I can pick different filled region styles. So I could go for horizontal. I could then perhaps change it to diagonal up like that. And I can change any of these whenever I want to. There's the vertical one there. Now that's really nice because it looks like some nice laminate flooring with those lines there. But if I go in and edit the type like so, there is actually a system family called filled region and the type is vertical. So what I can do now, you'll notice, is there's the foreground fill pattern, there's the background fill pattern, and there's the colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to call it vertical and I'm going to call it red, like so. Vertical red. Click on OK, and there's my vertical red. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the vertical 3mm drafting, notice drafting, not model, but I'm going to change the colors. I'm going to make them red, like so. So I'll OK that one, and the background, I'll make that red as well, and I'll OK that as well. So masking, yes, that's in place as well. I click on OK, and there's my fill vertical red, like so, and you'll notice it's red instead. And it's that quick and easy. I can now select that when I want to, click on the edge there, and I can go back to just my regular vertical, like so, click away from it, and you'll see it's black again. So I can generate different types of families using those fill patterns in Revit. And the benefit I've got there is I can set all of those up to the same standards as I might have in my AutoCAD drawings, which means everything in Revit replicates the same standard. And it's that quick and it's that easy. In the previous video, we looked at fill patterns and how they can be used in our Revit projects to replicate similar standards of fills or hatches in AutoCAD that might adhere to a particular standard like BS1192. So we're now going to look at one of the other additional settings where, again, you can change the settings in your Revit projects to match the standards that you already have in your AutoCAD drawings. So I'm going to go to the Manage tab on the ribbon, and I'm going to go to Additional Settings here in the Settings panel, and we're going to look at line styles. Now, this allows us to create or modify line styles that we have in our Revit project. So there's our line styles dialog box. You'll notice I can create new subcategories, I can select all, I can select none, or I can invert the settings. If I expand out lines here, you can see that there's all these different line styles available to me already. So I've got things like medium lines, thin lines, wide lines, and so on. So I can create a new one, like so. There's the name of it, and it's in the subcategory of lines. There we go, like so. So I might want to create a dashed line style. Now, sometimes you might lapse into AutoCAD speak here because a line style is the equivalent of a line type in AutoCAD. So I'm going to do this one. I'm going to call it dashed lines, like so. So there's my new subcategory. Click on OK, like so. Now there's my dashed lines. The projection is one. Line color, I'm going to make them red because then they stand out. So there's my dashed lines there. I'm going to click here, and I can now go and pick one of the line patterns available to me in Revit. So I can go down here, I've got solid lines, center lines. Oh, surprise, surprise, I have a dash available to me. Now we'll look at line patterns in a little while. But the idea being is my dashed line style is now there. I'll apply it, and I'll click on OK. So that's my dashed lines available to me. Now I'm going to zoom in on this top left area in the ground floor plan of our office reception area project again. So I'm going to zoom in here. And you can see there's our reception area there with the double doors. Now it may be that I want to draw some lines in there to represent something. So I go to the Annotate tab. And now you'll see that I've got the ability to draw detail lines here, like so. So these are view specific. So these are lines that I only want to appear in this 00 ground floor plan. So I click on detail line. And what I can do now is I can go to my line style here. And if I look now, there's my dashed lines. So there's my line style. I select it. And now when I'm drawing the lines, you'll notice what they look like. If I come across here, I'm just going to draw a few lines like this. So I'm going to come across that line in there, and then I'll come back up to there. And then what I'll do is I'll just hit escape a couple of times. And you'll notice now that I've got my dashed lines using my line style. That's how quick and easy these line styles can be set up. But the benefit is you can utilize them with colors and also with what they call the line patterns, which we'll look at in a moment. And the patterns are really important. They're things like dashes, dash dot, and so on. And they're the equivalent of your line types. So the benefit is when you start looking at your line patterns, you can apply them to your line styles, and you get a result like that in the 00 ground floor plan. In the previous video, when we looked at our line styles, I commented on things like the line patterns and also the projection. Now, the projection is what relates to the line weights in your additional settings in your Revit project. And again, this can be applied to the same standard methodology that you might have in your AutoCAD drawings that you may also use with a particular project in Revit. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at these dashed lines we created in the previous video using that new line style, dashed lines. Now, the projection for that was 1. I just left it at the default of 1. Now, these line weights are really important, but you need to understand how the projection setting works. So make note of the scale of the 00 ground floor plan. Down here, bottom left, it's 1 to 100. So now I go into additional settings in the Manage tab in the ribbon, and I go to line weights. So we're looking at 1 to 100 here, like so. And the projection at the moment for that dashed line style is 1. So that means that it'll be 0.01 millimeters line weight. Okay, now these are all preset in Revit based on your templates and so on that you get with Revit. And I can click on a cell and I can change that value. So again, all of these line weights can be changed in relation to what you've already got in AutoCAD, to a particular British standard, say BS1192. All of these can be updated accordingly. You can add and you can delete at any time. Now, what I'd like you to do is look at 1 to 100, but look at the projection of 5. That is 0.5 millimeters line weight. So just keep a memory sort of click in your head, like you do on a calculator, memory plus, remember? M plus and 0.5 millimeters for a projection of 5. Okay, now I'm not going to make any changes. And what we're going to do now is go back to our line styles. So there's our line styles there. I'm going to expand it out here like so, and there's my dashed lines, and it's using a projection of 1 at the moment. I'm going to click in there and change that to 5, like so. I'm then going to apply that, and watch what happens when I click on OK. Now, it's that 0.5 millimeters projection due to the line weight. So that 5 projection sets it to 0.5 millimeters line weight at a 1 to 100 scale. So you can see how that's changed due to the projection and the line weight settings changing. So again, all of this can be set up in a Revit template to align with the standards you might already have in AutoCAD. If you're taking a project from AutoCAD into Revit, or you're using AutoCAD drawings that might need to be utilized to start generating a Revit project. We're staying in our office reception area.rvt file, and you'll notice we're still in the ground floor plan as well, and we've still got our little detail lines here that are red and dashed and set to a specific line weight in the line style. Now, what we're going to look at now are our actual line patterns. Now, these are what relate directly back to line types in AutoCAD. Line patterns are the equivalent of So in this particular case, our dashed lines, our line style, are using a dash line pattern, which basically is those dashes and spaces there. So if I go to the Manage tab and go to Additional Settings in the Settings panel, you'll see that we've got line patterns here, like so. So if I jump into this line patterns dialog box, you see there's all my line patterns there, and there's the dash line pattern that is being used by this particular line style to create these detailed lines. Now you'll notice that I can edit any particular line pattern. So I've got dash selected, I click on edit, and I can go in there and I can change the settings. So the type is dash, space, and as you can see, 3 millimeters, 3 millimeters. So I can define a sequence of lengths and spaces and dashes and dots. And as you can see, I can edit or create any line pattern I want to. Now, the benefit you've got with this, with line patterns, is you can relate these directly back to your line type files in AutoCAD. In AutoCAD, you have a .lin file, and you can open it up in something like Windows Notepad, and it's totally editable because it's a .txt type file. So all I've got to do is specify the same settings in my line pattern as I would have in my line types in AutoCAD, and I can adhere to the same standards in AutoCAD as I'm going to in Revit. It's that quick and easy. So if I click on cancel there, and I'll click on cancel again to close the line patterns dialog box. Let's go back to my line styles here and just expand this out. And there's my dashed lines there using that dash line pattern. So if I change that, click on the list and pick something else. Let's go for dash dot instead. So these are my dashed lines, but they're using a dash dot line pattern this time. Now that's one of the preset ones that you saw in the dialog box a moment ago. I'm going to apply that and I'm going to OK it. And you'll now see it's very different because I'm using a totally different line pattern. So basically that line pattern there, you can see that the dashes and the spaces are obviously much bigger. So if I go back to my additional settings, go back to my line styles, expand out the lines here again and go to dash lines, I'll change that back to a dash like we had before, apply it and OK it. And we're back to those dash lines again for the detail lines in the 00 ground floor plan. Once again, we're staying in the office reception area.rvt file and we're in the 00 ground floor plan. And you can see I've left the zoom and the magnification in exactly the same place as it was at the end of the last video. We're going to look at another one of the additional settings available to you in Revit. And this is a really nice one because what it allows you to do is it allows you to replicate sort of the transparency kind of settings that you might be utilizing in AutoCAD as well. So if I go to the Manage tab on the ribbon, into the Settings panel and click on Additional Settings, we're going to look at the halftone underlay settings here. So if I click on that, what it does is it allows me to set the halftone and underlay settings. Now, underlays might be something like, let's say, a hatch pattern of an area that you've brought in with a link drawing from AutoCAD. You can apply a weight. Now remember, a weight has a projection value in Revit. So when I click on the flyout here, you can see there's no override at the moment, but I can specify a particular projection. Now you'll remember that a projection of 5 in the 1 to 100 scale gives us a 0.5 millimeter line weight. So that's what that projection value there is for. When you go and look at your line weights in the additional settings, these are the projection values that apply. You can specify a pattern. So there's our patterns there that we talked about. So we've got things like dash and dash dot that we looked at earlier with our little red dashed lines that we had on the 00 ground floor plan. And you can also apply halftone to anything that you might bring in as an underlay. Now, the halftone setting itself is an overall setting, and you can apply that to any element as an override in your Revit projects. And it's normally set to 50%. So you've got light and dark, and it's set to 50%. So it's sort of halfway. So basically, anything that's black in the 00 ground floor plan, if I applied halftone to it, it will become half as dark. So it'll be like a grey color. Now, obviously, any overrides I apply in here, I can reset back to their original settings. I haven't made any changes, so the reset at the moment is obviously greyed out. I'll just click on OK there because I don't want to apply anything else apart from what's already there. If I select this wall here, for example, and then I right click, I can override the graphics in that particular view, the 0, ground floor plan. So if I override the graphics in that view, let's say by category, so that's all my walls in that view, you'll notice I've got a halftone button right there. Now all of this cut patterns, surface transparency, I don't need to worry about any of that at all at the moment. I'm just going to go for halftone, click it like so, and apply that, okay. And when I come out now, can you see all of my walls are now that grey colour? They're all half-toned, as you can see. And what I can do now is I can bring those back again by changing the settings of the visibility graphics. But the idea being is I can, with that wall still selected, right-click, override graphics in view by category, and you'll notice they're half-toned. If I untick it and then apply that and OK it, everything comes back again. It escapes deselect the wall. So you see how quick and easy it is to utilize halftone, but you've got to know in the additional settings what you're doing when you change those halftone and underlay settings. Now, an underlay is something you would place underneath your view in a Revit project. So it could be, for example, an imported CAD drawing or a linked CAD drawing. You can change the underlay settings to that if you wish as well. Or you can just set it to halftone and it'll just be that grey colour. You'll notice in this video, I've jumped back into AutoCAD for a moment. Now, the reason I've done that is we're going to have a little look at how we would match our AutoCAD standard settings so that they actually work within our Revit project as well. So things like line types are prime examples in AutoCAD. Now, we know that in all of our AutoCAD drawings that we've used so far in the chapters in this course, they are adhering to BS 1192, British Standard 1192, because I exported those settings out from the Revit project originally to create a drawing that we can use in AutoCAD. And that's what you can see in front of you right now. Now, you don't actually need to download any drawing from the library for this AutoCAD part of this video. I'm just going to show you where to find things in AutoCAD that you can relate to Revit so that you can take the standards you've got in AutoCAD into your Revit projects. So I'm going to go to the Home tab in AutoCAD and I'm going to go to Layer Properties. And it doesn't matter which layer you use for this, just pick a line type. I'm going to go for Grid Line here, like so, and I'm going to go to Load, like so. Now I can load or reload line types into my AutoCAD drawing. But what I want to show you is this particular bit here, the file, the AutoCAD ISO.lin file. Now this is that file that I mentioned in previous videos where all of your line types are stored. So if I now click on File, like so, you can see the dialog box there. I've got AutoCAD ISO.lin and AutoCAD.lin. Now what I'm going to do is just make this dialog box a little bit smaller because it's quite large. Let's do that and let's just drop that up there like that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm now going to right click on AutoCAD ISO.lin. You can just double click on it like that and it'll open up. Now my text editor hasn't opened up in a hurry there, so what I'll do is I'll just click on File again, and the quickest way to get anything to open with something is to right click on it. Now my text editor wasn't open at the time, so it just kind of closed the dialog box. So if I go there and go Open With, it'll allow me to use something like Notepad in Windows. So I'll just use Notepad for now. And that opens up in Notepad. Give it a few seconds to load. And what you'll find is you'll see now that in the Notepad, it tells you it's the AutoCAD ISO line type definition file or .lin file. Now, everything with these semicolons is just a note, but as I scroll down the list, you'll notice there's all these settings here. So for all of these particular line types, there's a setting for each of them. Now, you've got to look at this here. It's these values here, the numbers. These are millimeters. And you'll notice there, border is the name. Then you've got the type and the description, and then you've got this A, and the A indicates basically that it's using these particular values. Now, you'll notice that you've got things like 12.7, minus 6.35, 12.7, minus 6.35, then a 0, and then a minus 6.35. So these are all of your spacings and dashes and dots and so on in each of the line types in AutoCAD. So as I come down, let's just look at dashed. As you can see there, look, the dash size is 12.7 and the space is the minus 6.35. So there's the dash, there's the minus 6.35. The minus indicates a gap, just so that you know. So you can see there's all your values there. So the trick would be to basically save this .lin file out to something like a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet. You want it in an external source somewhere rather than stored in the .lin file format in the mechanism of AutoCAD. So you would take these values. Now, I'm not going to bore you by copying and pasting into something like Word or Excel. I'm just going to close it for now. I'm not going to make any changes. And I'm also going to close the dialog box. So in AutoCAD, that would be how you find all of your line type, sizes, and settings. So I'm going to cancel that, close the Layer Properties Manager. So now imagine I've done all of that and I've got a Word document in front of me with all of those settings. I'm going to jump back into Revit now, and there's Revit. So what I can do now is I can go back into my additional settings here, jump into my line patterns here, which are the equivalent of line types in AutoCAD, and I can now start creating new line patterns. So I click there, give it a new name, add the type, add the value. And it's really, really easy in Revit because you just specify the type, dash, dot, or space, and the value. Now we're working in millimeters in a metric project in Revit, so all of the values would be in millimeters. So I could create a new line pattern property. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new one, but I'm going to go to dash first, and I'm going to go to edit. So on the dash one, the dash and the space are 3 millimeters. So I'll cancel that. I'm going to basically create a dash 2, okay, or a dash 0.5. Basically, it's going to be smaller. So they're going to be 1.5 and 1.5. So I click on new, and I'll call it dash 2. So I'll click in there, and we'll call this dash 2. And let's say I've got some settings from AutoCAD that this dash 2 type is a particular size and setting. So I'm going to put dash there. So type is a dash, like so. Value 1.5 millimeters. And then I'm going to put a space. So if I click there, I've got space like so. And then I'm going to put 1.5 millimeters. So there's my dash 2. Now, in AutoCAD terminology, you have a dash, which is the normal full size one. You have a dash 2, which is half size, and then you have a dash x2, which would be twice the size. So really, if I'm going to do this in full AutoCAD terminology, I would lose the space there, like so. So it's dash 2 without a space. Click on OK, and the name dash 2 is already in use. So I'll close that for the moment and just cancel that, and there's dash 2 there. And surprise, surprise, if I go to edit that, that's exactly what I was trying to create. So you can see the terminology and the settings already relate to each other in context from AutoCAD into Revit. So all I've got to do here is now in my line style, change it to dash 2. So I'll cancel that and zoom in on my little red dash detail lines. As you can see, there they are there. And they're using the regular dash line pattern. So if I go additional settings now, jump back into my line styles, expand the lines out, there's my dash lines. I want to use dash 2 this time. There's dash 2. I'll apply it, I'll OK it, and notice the gaps and the dashes are smaller. They're 1.5 millimeters in size this time, in context in the 1 to 100 setting in the view in the 00 ground floor plan. So can you see how everything relates to each other? If you're bringing an AutoCAD project into a Revit project and you're redesigning and so on, there's lots of settings that are already in context with each other. But also you've got the ability to change the settings in your Revit project so that everything tallies up to whatever standard or industry standard you might be using in your AutoCAD drawings as well.